That's what they want to do for a while. Awesome. Totally did that wrong. Okay.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too shabby. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm crazy busy right now. We got a lot of stuff going on with school activities finally ramping up.
Oh yeah?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
after school stuff or what's going on?
after school, during school, on the weekends,
Yeah.
during weeknights, like just all over the place. Cross country, ballet,
Oh wow.
piano, and soccer. Like,
Making up for lost time.
yeah, well, I think this is the norm. This is when you have kids. You're just
Yeah.
This is what you get.
Do you let them do pretty much anything, or you limit like, okay, you got one activity each or two activities each?
I mean, if they were crazy ambitious, maybe I would need to lock it down a little bit. But right now, we are like forcing them into doing things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they don't have a choice right now. They got to do a thing.
You're like, pick your thing. Go on, do it. Nice.
But yeah, that's why Matt's Travis not gonna be able to be here because he's got kid stuff going on tonight too.
Oh yeah. Last week, like 3 weeks ago, my sister moved here with her two kids.
Oh, cool.
And mostly my husband's been driving the kids to school and picking them up because they weren't at their house yet. Then last week my mom got in, so I took the week off, but we were really busy like moving them.
Yeah.
And I had the opportunity to take them to school and pick them up a few times. It's pretty wild experience.
Yeah, it's interesting to see school-age kids. They just look so like little babies with all their style and everything. It's fun.
It's quite a variety. Hey, Toran. What's up, gang? Hi, y'all. Not much. Just talking about the school year getting in the swing. It's probably
you used to be a teacher, right?
Oh yeah, back at Grandview.
Way back.
I was wearing my hoodie today at work, and a colleague was like, "Oh, do you used to go to Grandview, or are you just a big Vikings fan?" And I was like, "Well, I actually taught there for a couple years, back when I was a young buck."
So
That's
right
good
now I've
times.
got sounds of I am developer going. I don't know if you guys follow.
Oh, I didn't even notice that.
Yeah. I don't know if you follow developer, but evidently he or she, I have no idea. I don't know much about this person other than the Twitter feed, but evidently they just came out with awesome, a playlist, I'll say that, organized or indexed from zero.
Right, very nice.
Those are all the songs right there. The other thing that was just tweeted out was this one, which I thought was pretty good. That's kind of my world right now.
Yeah, I just shared my son. He's actually been writing a lot of classical style music in that genre, and some of it's pretty good actually. This song I just shared out is actually his newest song that's out there as an EP or a single, and man, it's kind of a good jam. So he's trying to grow his following. I think he's got like 10,000 monthly listeners or something.
Awesome.
That's wild.
Yeah, I actually had some big news. I'm changing jobs myself later this month for the first time in a long time. Yeah, I'm going to be going to a very tiny startup out of Chicago. There are about 7 or 8 people, and just a different opportunity there, I think, to eventually in the 6 to 9 month range get me more into like director of engineering. Hopefully that's the thought anyway.
wow.
And I'm excited. Yeah, man. Different than my current situation where we're not at that spot as a company to really have a technical leader come in and grow, because we already have a great technical leader at my company. So this is just kind of a different thing and should be exciting, man.
Congratulations.
Still working remotely?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
What's the domain gonna be like?
It's e-commerce. So some experience with that, just doing my own thing this year, but they're obviously at a much bigger scale, real scale, doing construction e-commerce. So you can think of like Caterpillar, John Deere, Case New Holland, those sort of places. So
Is it business to business?
what do you mean?
Like, are they selling to other companies
Oh,
or like direct to customer?
I mean, I think it is that simple. Like you go to their website and you buy stuff, but traditionally it's obviously very big construction businesses or, you know, $1 million plus budget projects potentially that are buying this stuff. What I didn't know about the domain is just that, you know, you have a machine and it's sort of like code where like certain machines are like certain code paths where if the machine goes down or you like actually have a long-lived branch and it actually is blocking a big part of the other team, or maybe even like 5-6 developers, they can't actually get their work in. There's literally you're just sitting on money, you know, like you're burning it. So their purpose, I think, from an e-commerce side is just to make sure that you're not sitting on a machine that can't do anything, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've heard that. There's lots of crazy analogies with manufacturing to software engineering.
Yeah, it should be a wild ride. And I honestly, I'm just so intrigued by the founders. We just overlap so much in what we value and what we want to do. And the domain itself, I mean, I don't think it's going to be a insanely technical challenge, like, you know, working at WhatsApp or something, but they are using Elixir. So that's kind of cool. Be staying with Elixir and Phoenix there and doing some React a little bit. So
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah, I was actually quite surprised how many Midwest or fairly close to the Midwest companies have been reaching out to me about Elixir in like the last few months when I was just kind of poking around, and really surprised that this company in Chicago, there's also like cars.com out of Chicago and other big companies that way, but there's a whole consultancy, a team in Kansas City a friend of mine runs that's just purely Elixir and Erlang. That's all they do.
Wow.
So I feel like it's creeping in. It's creeping in.
Yeah,
for
sure. I've seen it out there in a few job postings, experience in Elixir.
Yeah, I was kind of interested, like, to gauge, you know, the interest from folks on this meetup, just because you guys are kind of like the hands and feet of the early adopter hobbyist programmer a bit. That's just a little bit more your niche in Des Moines, and I was surprised anyone signed up at all. So it's awesome that we got some people out here.
Yeah, welcome everyone that's joined.
Yeah, indeed. We can get things rolling here. So first of all, can you hear me all right? Here, I've got music going in the background. I don't know if that's too loud or obnoxious or whatnot, but all right. So we have quite a few that RSVP'd, and I did send out as many invites as I could through Eventbrite. If I miss somebody, I'm going to be kind of like checking my email and all that and trying to see if I can stay up to date on whatever. There's in addition to the Zoom feed that we have going, this is also being live streamed on Twitch. Twitch.tv/DSM WebGeeks.com. So there's quite a few viewers over there, and there is a chat over there, and I will do my best to field questions and kind of like have things going in both places in the Zoom chat and on the Twitch chat. So anyway, with that out of the way, this is WebGeeks. Welcome. We are a user group that focuses on new trends and techniques within web development. Through this pandemic, experience, we've teamed up with another user group called DSM WebGeeks, or DSM JS, and together we're joining forces to hopefully bring you awesome and fun content every month. We try to do it on the second Monday or Tuesday of every month. We're going to be doing this over Zoom, you know, for definitely for the foreseeable future. It's always going to be on Zoom. Sometimes we will try to have in-person meetings, and hopefully those can start up when things get a little bit safer for everybody. If there's ever anything y'all want to see, content you want us to talk about, speakers you want us to have on, let us know. Hit us up at dsmwebgeeks.com or dsmjs.com. And in a little bit here, once Toran gets talking, I will do my best to spam out those links in all the chats that we've got going here. You can hit us up on Twitter as well. We're all pretty active on Twitter, and I believe we have a Facebook group that is fairly active as well. Okay, with all that out of the way, our speaker tonight is Toran, and Toran is going to lead us through kind of an awesome project here, and there will be some hands-on, you know, areas where you can get involved. So hopefully you have whatever you need at home, but we will also keep this stream up for a few weeks on Twitch, and then I've got it recorded, so maybe I can spam it out on our YouTube channel or something. And then also you can always reference the GitHub repo, which is all out there on dsmwebgeeks.com on this post. All right. So Toran, y'all good to go? When you're ready, I'm going to hand you hosting access. And,
yes, I'm ready to roll, man.
Okay, and it does mean I'm going to have to kill the music.
That chill vibe you had going.
Yeah. That was I am Developer, if anybody's curious about hitting that up. Okay, so participants and Toran, you are now, okay, I'm gonna do an experiment. I'm gonna try to make you co-host. That still gives me host access. We're
okay,
gonna see if that, I don't know if that'll work.
Okay, looks like we're all still here.
Yeah. And
that's
you, good. Okay. Can you share your screen too, hopefully?
Yeah, actually, awesome. Okay.
Okay, cool.
So hopefully people are here for a little bit more than a presentation, because there's not many slides, and that's kind of the upside here. In fact, where's my demo code here? Okay, so it's basically there's a repo, I think, that was tweeted out, and it's just Toran B/LiveView-workshop on GitHub. And if you have not cloned this, definitely, while I'm rambling here in a second about what LiveView is at the high level, you could come out here and get this. There's really no NPM or node modules or anything to install, and it actually should be fairly for Windows, Linux, Mac. I have different instructions here for PowerShell if you're on Windows, but we did this workshop, or a very similar workshop, last year with just straight Elixir, and I think people had good luck on Windows. So if you do run into trouble, let Justin or somebody know on either the Twitch chat or the chat here in Zoom, just because I was hoping this would work for everybody, and I really was kind of careful about making sure you don't have to have like a specific machine with Elixir or Erlang or anything like that. You should be able to just Docker it up. In fact, I'm going to show real quick, if you're just not super Docker friendly, I'll just kind of show you from zero what that looks like. So you clone the workshop repo out there, and you basically do a Docker build, I think it is. Yeah, Docker build -t. And I'm going to blow this up a little bit. It's looking a little tiny, but it's just Docker build -t. And then I called mine game. You could technically call this whatever you want, but then you do a period at the end. So just basically game space dot or the period and hit enter. This will basically build your Docker, and you can basically run it with Docker run. So, oops, and all these commands are actually out there. This one for my Mac, and I think Linux is the same, is just Docker run -it space -p. 4000 is the port that we're going to use to go out and play around in the browser. And there's just another piece of command there to actually show it where this thing lives. This is going to allow you to really mount the game one time and run it and play with it. But then you can actually, from VS Code or from Vim or whatever, you can just hack around in this workshop directory, and those changes will live reload in your browser. So I'm going to do a Docker run here just to kind of show you. All it does is really drop you into the Docker container. And if you're not familiar with that, that's good, because there's not really much to be familiar with. We're going to run one command. It's called mix deps.get. And this is also in the repo README if you're like, I can't read this crazy font, but I will change that actually. So you do a mix deps.get, which is kind of like if you're a node developer, it's kind of like your npm install. It goes out and just gets Phoenix and a few other dependencies that we have and just installs those. And then finally, you can do mix phx server. And this is actually how we're going to spin the game up. So it really is that simple. We just Docker build, Docker run, and then mix deps install, and then mix phx.server. Really simple to get that going. Now, once you have 4000 running, I'm just going to show you what it looks like here in the browser. So if I go out here, you'll know that you're at a good place if you can actually hit localhost, and it renders a web page. Hopefully you don't have another web server running, and you can click this new game button, and it should just basically launch you into kind of the default shell or the hello page for the game that we're going to build in a little bit. Okay, so while people are doing their Docker build or their mix deps.get, if there's any questions, again, let us know, but I assume some of that stuff should be pretty straightforward. The next thing I'm going to do is just point out, if you go to the bottom of the README for the workshop, I think there's something that actually says, you know, Phoenix is pre 1.0, so be sure to reference the documentation as you search for this. PHX click and PHX hook. These are some handlers and vocabulary that we're going to talk about, but it is important to know where this documentation is, because a lot of this workshop today is really not going to be me live coding 100%. I'm going to give, you know, a couple exercises. I have about 3 of them that take, you know, probably 10 to 15 minutes. Some of them are really short at the beginning, but the last few may take a little bit longer. And I'll show you one example of how to use this documentation. So on the left, there's something called bindings. And if you click that, and I'll blow this web page up a little bit, this will be the documentation for the very first exercise that we're going to do in a few minutes, which is really around how you use these handlers in Phoenix LiveView. So I'm going to pause there just because I don't want to get too deep into LiveView without a really cheesy slide deck that I put together, just so if there's someone here that's like, hey, what is Phoenix LiveView? I want to talk about it. And thank you, Justin, for kind of updating with all the links to these things. If you don't have Docker, definitely get that going. That might take a minute to get rolled up. I'll let Justin continue to handle all this. And let's just talk real quick about Phoenix LiveView, because Phoenix LiveView really is just a kind of a tool that sits on top of a web framework. And that web framework is called Phoenix. But of course, Phoenix really sits on top of a different programming language called Elixir. And Elixir actually sits on top of a virtual machine called the Erlang Virtual Machine. So there's a lot of abstraction here, but I promise you, you really won't have to think about Elixir much, other than we're going to write some Elixir code. And you're definitely not going to have to spend too much time worrying about what is Phoenix LiveView versus Phoenix. For the most part, when I'm working in this web framework, I just think of it as Phoenix. And hopefully you'll see that it's pretty transparent here in a second. Let's talk about what happens to get this going. And this will be kind of the foundational, what is Phoenix LiveView, because we're going to build on this the rest of the workshop. So just like your regular web application, when you have these clients, these browsers, these things on the right, and they go out to connect to maybe your Phoenix web server, they'll make an HTTP request outgoing, hit that Phoenix server. And then what happens on the way back is you will get just the regular HTML page, but also what happens as part of this handshake is the HTTP connection is actually upgraded to a WebSocket connection. What this means is we basically are going to have a persistent channel that the client and the server remain connected all the time, which may seem very different than if you've been doing, Vue, React, or any other web framework where you just do an XHR or an asynchronous AJAX request over the wire, and then you get a response and you disconnect. And the reason for this architectural change is that what happens when you have a persistent connection is we can actually have Phoenix do the heavy lifting of all of the HTML virtual DOM diffing between actions, and then put together the smallest possible DOM patch. So you can think of like React or Vue that have a virtual DOM, and they will basically diff the changes and render to the browser those changes. Well, this can actually happen server side, and what Phoenix and LiveView will actually send back over the already existing connection to your browser is just the minimum payload to patch your DOM. And so you have an interactive experience, just like you would handwriting something with AJAX or using React, but you've got underneath of all this really a persistent session on the server that is in charge of rendering and understanding the state of the client. And all the client does is receive it, which is maybe very different than what you're at. So I kind of show this different graph here today, because this is traditionally what most companies, in fact, the company I work at right now, this is how we use Phoenix as a web server. We make a request from React, and on the way back, we actually use React to do the diffing of our JSON, and then we render with the virtual DOM in React, we render HTML on the client. And this just is going to be kind of a fundamental difference. And some people like to tout LiveView as well. We don't like to write JavaScript, or we think that's unnecessary. I actually personally don't take that route. I just see it as it's actually less complex, because you can see in this graph, I actually have a whole ecosystem, which is in a lot of cases Node, and you have a whole set of tools that go with that, which is either React, Vue, or whatever you're using. And those often differ from your backend API, which in this case might be Rails or Phoenix or Django. And often that just incurs a big amount of knowledge for someone to be super productive on all of those fronts, and myself included, like I do and have done JavaScript a long time. But I'll keep the sales pitch short here. I just kind of want to show back to this slide that really what we're going to do today, and what I hope to get across, is not all the implementation about HTML or JSON, but actually just that it feels, the programming model feels like server-side programming, but you get all the interactivity benefits you get with AJAX or a JavaScript framework, because it's got a persistent WebSocket connection for you. So let's pause there and just see if people are kind of getting along. Justin, what's your thought on if people are generally seem like they're going well? How's the Twitch stream? Any comments over there?
Yeah, I'm not seeing any comments so far. Yeah, what do we, is anybody having difficulties? I
see nothing in the chat, so.
Yeah, no, it seems like probably the majority of y'all are keeping up.
Okay.
I myself might be running into errors.
Okay, are you on a Mac though?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you had Docker installed. So are you just able to get the build itself going, or?
It was just straight up the on run it. When I run the run it command, it's invalid reference format repository must be lowercase, but that doesn't make any sense.
Repository must be, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's
anybody in the chat want to give us a thumbs up and say that they have been able to do a run IT, or I know we're asking for an extreme validation here, but I mainly just hope people are getting along with it. And Justin, I would be curious in the future to know what you bumped into, but
Mike got it, so maybe I'll ping Mike. And what happens?
Well, he is the smartest programmer in the room, so
delete the folder and clone it again.
Oh yeah, I could always try that. Yeah, I am also streaming videos, so we'll see if that is taking down some things. I do see a question in the Twitch chat. What happens when an exception on the socket LiveView disconnects?
Yeah, so just back to this kind of high level, Usually behind the scenes, Phoenix will be trying to reconnect for you. And so there's just kind of some reconnect logic in the JavaScript that they provide that just tries to go back out and reconnect to your Phoenix server. And when I saw this used in practice is I built a product on Phoenix LiveView. And when I would do my rolling deploys, you would actually see the browser. If you're watching the Chrome DevTools, you would see the browser disconnect, showing that that server is down. But then just sitting there right on the page, when the next server comes back online, it would just pick up the connection and then resume, in this case, the game. In fact, one thing related to this, I want to show people is that although we're going to play President here, there is a presidentcardgames.com that I actually built. And this is the exact game we're going to play with. So in this case, when I would do a deploy of the President game and you were in the middle of a game, let's say, you would actually just reconnect and the state from the database would be rehydrated. And you would just get, if you had different HTML for some reason, you would just get a diff of the new HTML. So I wanted to show this. Who's brave enough to go to presidentcardgames.com and take the malware that I'm sure I've got out there and join me for a game? Because I do want to show really quick. I don't want to spend a lot of time on just the game and playing around, but I do want to show everyone in the room just kind of like, what are we trying to do? Because some people honestly have told me like, I've never heard of this game and I don't know what this game is. I think it goes by many names. Capitalism is one of the names. And all you're really trying to do is beat the card that is currently up there. So if there's a card that someone played and it's like a 9 or an 8, if you can play a bigger card, like a face card, like a king, then you play over them. And then you just kind of keep rotating until you're out of cards. Now, the purpose of the game is to be the first one to lose or get rid of your hand. It's called a shedding game where you shed your hand. And if you do that first, you are the president. Now, in the engine, if you want to get into the weeds, you'll see that the president actually gets some perks. The president is given the best 2 cards of the deal, and the scum, or basically the worst player at the bottom, is given the president's worst cards. So you are incentivized to finish the game first. And obviously, if you're just not doing well, it's harder for you to climb up and beat the president. So that's kind of the name of the game. But all right, nobody's connecting out here. So I'm just gonna actually open up Firefox.
I was in there.
Yeah. So jump out there and join me. So I see a few people now. That's awesome. So I'm going to basically start the game, and all this is really going to do is it's going to take a 52 card deck and slice it up against the 3 of us. Now, the reason I show the game to get us started is the first exercise is going to be about how to skip your turn. So you see this big green button up here. I think I can kind of blow this up. The big green button really is an indicator of 2 things. First is kind of saying, hey, you're the active player. So it's kind of a nice visual user experience thing to say, hey, Justin, like you are the player, pay attention, play your turn. But also it's a way to say, I can't beat the king that's up there because all I have is a jack. And if that's the case, then you can skip, which is what that button actually does. Now, in this case, I know someone else is playing, so I'm gonna just kick them an easy one. I'll throw a 7 over there. And I don't know if that's me or Justin. Yeah, looks like my other player's not up yet. So this must be on you, Justin.
Yep.
Okay.
So it is on me, but
you're running into troubles again.
No. It'll work totally. I just have no idea what I'm doing.
That's okay. You're just gonna try and beat the 7, and so what you do is click the card, and then click it again. Yep.
Oh, okay. I see what. Yeah. There it is.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Okay, so what happened is it flipped back over to my 3rd player, or my 2nd player. And one thing I do want to show is that you can play more than 1 card at a time. So this person, Demanding Ninja, I actually have an amazing hand. I have, I have 3 queens and 3 kings. Obviously, I was dealt a good hand. So I want to show real quick how you can touch different cards, because the second exercise we're going to do is called stage or play. And the reason it's called stage is that you can play more than 1 card. So in this case, if I touch the queen, it's going to stage the queen. Then if I touch a second one, it'll stage that. Now I have an option here. I have a 3rd queen all the way over here. If I choose not to touch that queen, that's fine. And if I just touch an existing staged card, like the 2nd queen of clubs, it will play 2 of them. So now that's important, because here's one thing in the game that happens is if somebody has 2 queens and you're looking at your cards and saying, how can I beat 2 queens like this player over here? Well, I have 2 jacks and I can touch them and they kind of come up, but I can't play 2 jacks because they're not more powerful than 2 queens. So actually this player, unless I have like 3 of a kind, I'm kind of looking down here, I might have 3 6s. I do not. Wow, this player has a bad hand. I was really hoping for a way out. Actually, no, I have 3 2s. So check this out. I can play 2, 2, and I have another 2. And what this allows me to do is, of course, 3 of a kind is better than 2 of anything. So if you have 2 kings out there, it doesn't matter. And so now, Justin, kicking it over to you, there's basically 3 cards, which is really hard to beat, right? You have to have 3 of a better card. Do you have that?
I do not, unfortunately.
You can always skip.
Wait.
He's thinking, oh, look at this.
Got it.
Baller move.
Dang.
3 9s. Okay, so you guys kind of get the gist of the game. I won't spend all night on the game, but I wanted to show a couple of those things because we are going to build this. And no joke, if you go to localhost 4000 right now, the scaffolding for what is here is kind of already present, which is cool because I didn't want people to have to build this from scratch. I wanted them to feel still like you were being powered and build something fun. So let's go to the version that we have out here, and you can obviously start your own game if you have localhost. But we're going to come out here in just a minute and actually do some of these exercises. But first, I want to go through kind of like a really bare bones example of this without taking away from the game, a really easy example to get started, which is going to be that skip. I'm going to show everybody's favorite to do MVC and just kind of give you a walkthrough in code on how I work on this. So I'm going to flip back over to my to-do. I'm going to tear down this over here real quick. Don't need to worry about that. Okay, so we're going to focus just on a really simple example to give everybody a feel of, all right, Toran, you said WebSockets and no JavaScript. I don't know what that means. So let's just take an actual look. There's going to be in the game, there's really only one file that you're going to work in, and it's called game live. This one I think has a similar feel where it's just a thing called page live. And I'm sure I should probably real quick go to my default and change the font here because this is a really annoying font for somebody non-familiar with it. Apologies for people who are like, Toran, tell me you actually code in this every day. And funny enough, I actually do. I'm going to go to Intel Mono. There we go. Okay, so regular Mono font so people can actually read it now. Oops. And let's just take a look at what the Phoenix LiveView is. So if you're not familiar with Elixir or you haven't seen it, it has a Ruby and Python-ish feel. It is not white space aware, meaning that like spaces don't matter as much as Python, but it kind of looks like a blend of both of those a little bit. A lot of Ruby developers, maybe Justin, you've done a lot more Ruby than I have. Maybe you would say that there's some similarities to Ruby, which hopefully makes people feel comfortable. It's a dynamic programming language, so there's definitely going to be a chance to shoot yourself in the foot, which is half the fun of dynamic programming. I'm going to point out really the main method that the HTML lives in, and is a function called render. And if you're not familiar with Ruby, Python, or Elixir, this def is really just kind of the name of the function head or the function signature. So you just say def and then some function name. And render is a special function here that really is something we are using for Phoenix LiveView specifically. So what we're going to look at is one really simple example here. And I'm going to spin this up actually, just so that we actually have a localhost 4000 to play with here. And I want to show kind of the feature. Everybody's really familiar with To-Do MVC, so I'm not going to belabor this, but you know, To-Do MVC has, assuming that it actually boots up for me here, more stuff here. Okay, and as you add these things, of course, you can mark them done and you can change the names. But more importantly, what I want to show for this example is this little X that is on the right side. And what is not wired up that we're going to build real fast is I click this and it deletes the item. That would be a super awesome example to get us started because it's the similar mechanics of this binding in Phoenix LiveView, but you guys will get to go do the fun part in the game, and I'll just show the boring part here inside To-Do MVC. So with that out in front of us, let's go find where that thing is. And first I want to show in amongst this HTML, there's basically one for loop. And this is kind of like where we're looping over the list of the items. And Phoenix LiveView has the ability to make components. They're not quite on par with exactly what a React component would look like in syntax. So you'll have to ignore this kind of funky, what is this, alligator %equal. But the idea is still very much the same. You can encapsulate behavior and state down inside of a component, which is really just a module. And we're going to go take a look at this to-do item, because this is where all the HTML for the actual to-do lives. It basically lives inside of an LI, and there's a little form inside here, and there's a button. And this is the destroy class button, which is that little red X that we just looked at. And what I want to have happen is that when I click this button, I want to have it dispatch over that WebSocket and remove the to-do with this ID, and then re-render on the client in the browser all of the to-dos that don't have this ID. So we basically find a way to delete it. And we're going to start just by kind of looking at how this actually works in the bindings. And this is the stuff up on the documentation. And the first is you can do phx dash something, and this will be a way to kind of prescribe a value to get this variable later. And I've just sort of left this one plugged in as the ID of the to-do. But there's no actual click handler. So you can imagine, like in React, you have on-click equals. We need something like that for Phoenix LiveView, and that's going to be phx click. And this is really any string that you want it to be. And we're just going to call it delete to do. And when I actually put that click handler in here, the Java, or not the JavaScript, but the actual server has a bunch of functions that look like this. And you'll see this in the documentation as well, called handle event. And so I'm just going to basically describe a handle event here for the delete to do. And that's the name that we just put in there. And the second parameter we'll take a look at in a second is whatever you've put into the phx value ID. So we'll be able to get an ID off of this in just a second. And then finally, you actually get the WebSocket as the last argument every time. And so all we expect to do in the code here is get the to-do, reject, which is like a loop operation to get rid of the to-do, and then re-render. So how do we do those three things? So the first thing is we're going to get the to-do ID, and we're going to get that from this thing here, which I've just kind of labeled value. And value is going to be the ID that is actually coming through that kind of click handler. And we're going to take this ID and pipe it, which is what you'll see this little syntax here. And we're going to pipe that into string.toInteger. And this is just because as a side effect, everything that comes through the JavaScript event handling here to the server side is actually a string. And of course, we're going to actually have these IDs on your server or maybe in your database as an integer. So I'm just going to convert this. Next thing is I need to actually get the list of the active to-dos that we already have. Now, where do those come from? So the secret that will be kind of crucial for all the game work that we're going to do is everything lives on this socket.assigns. So there is kind of a special property, and you can kind of see where it gets created here in the mount function, which is really when the LiveView page is constructed. And the thing we're actually going to look for is this thing called to-dos. And I'm going to show kind of two ways to look at this, just because if you come from a JavaScript background or you've been doing a lot of JavaScript like I do sometimes, it kind of looks like destructuring. And so I'm going to show it down here, and I'm going to break apart assigns, which is actually a map, and then whoops, to-dos. And I'm getting to-dos not from a magical place again, but right from this line up here in the mount function, where when this LiveView comes together, I basically create a single to-do called use Phoenix LiveView with a few properties. And so I can actually get that by doing what looks like destructuring, which is kind of pulling apart something from socket assigns and then destructuring it. But this is actually called pattern matching, and I won't get too hung up on the verbiage, but the difference really is that I can do this both in line as I showed down there, or up top in the actual function itself. In the head or the function body or the function signature up here. But now once I actually have these to-dos, I can say like new to-dos equals, and then I can use this enum module, which I want to pause real quick, just to point out some documentation, if I can get my, so we're going to go back to just the bottom here, because I have kind of this learning Elixir section, and it just kind of talks about how to do some of the functions we're going to do in the game. But definitely make sure you check out this enum module, and I'll just click to it for a second, because it has all kinds of useful stuff that you're probably familiar with in other programming languages. Like, how do I loop over a list and then transform it? So here's a quick example of map and then sum, and there's all kinds of other stuff. We're going to use actually reject. So let me see if I actually have, oops. Reject, here we go. And if you click any of these, they'll take you to a really simple example, so you can kind of see what's happening. In this example here, we're going to take the list 1, 2, 3, and we're going to run a function through there and basically see if this thing is mod, if this thing's an even number by using the remainder, or if you're familiar with the mod function in other programming languages, it acts a little bit like that. And what we're doing is saying, I only want this list of 1, 2, 3 to return odd numbers. And we're getting basically back from this, sorry, rem x2 would say even. And so we're actually rejecting the even numbers. So we get back 1 and 3 because 2 as an even number from the list is kicked out or rejected. And we're going to do this exact same code back in the terminal to reject the to-do that someone has sent through. So I'm going to do enum.reject. And there's like a function here where I can actually expect the to-do that comes in. And then the one I actually want to match this is going to be to-do.id double equals to-do ID up here. And this is just a really simple loop type enumeration operation that says, okay, get me the new to-dos. What is the last step? And in Phoenix LiveView, the last step here is really to say no reply. And then normally you would just return the socket. And that's just sort of a way of ending. And then in this case, if I just return the socket without anything on it, then there's actually no change. And there would be no HTML or diffing. That means there would be no new HTML patched over the wire. So what we want to do instead is we actually do want to assign and send back to the browser a new set of to-dos. In particular, we want to actually send over new to-dos. And we can do this with a really quick shortcut called assign. And you see it up top in, let me get my line numbers here, line 57. And so you can just say assign, you can do your socket, and then we're actually going to, instead of just returning the to-dos, I have this special computed to-dos that we're going to send back. And we're going to send those back here in just a second. Now, the one function I'm going to cheat on here is that new to-dos is pretty raw. It's like just the actual to-do structure. It doesn't take into account sorting. It doesn't take into account getting a number of how many are visible. And I actually have a nice little function that we're going to actually use down here called compute to-dos. And this is one where I just pass into it basically 2 variables, and then I get back out of it the count and the sorted and correctly filtered computed. So we're just going to go back up here, and I'm going to cheat a little bit by saying use this. Then we'll actually return, instead of the new to-dos, we expect those, as well as the count, because if you're filtering this, eventually you may update the count. For right now, it's probably the exact same value. So let's see what actually comes back over the wire here. And previously you saw in the browser that there was actually nothing working. Where's my to-do MVC here? Oh, whoops. All right, so we got an unexpected token on, let's go back to page 64 here, or line 64. And, okay, this is a tricky little thing where basically I didn't have end. So I had something like this, which is kind of weird because it looks like in some programming languages that you actually don't need the end keyword, but like Ruby, a lot of times you need the end to mark this off. But I will show where I think I was going in my head was, oh, this is a little bit verbose and some programmers might not like this so much. So let's go in insane level terse. And I'm going to do this by actually showing kind of a shorthand, which says I can skip function by just actually using an ampersand, and I can skip calling out or naming the first parameter of to do by just using amper1. And I can actually shortcut this entire function by saying amper1.id double equals to do ID without an end at all, which is kind of interesting. So I'll let that soak in. This is honestly just kind of eventually, as you get working in Elixir, you may shorthand this because you can obviously cut down a lot of boilerplate by doing that. So, all right, let's see. We still actually have a failure here. Oh, I actually am missing my show command. So to actually use this compute, I need to actually pull out one more variable from our state here, which is called show. And you can just essentially pattern match out or destructure this out of the socket again. And there we go. Looks like everything's going to be functional anyway. You don't have a compile error. And now if I actually go and add this, their little X will completely remove it, which is cool. Ooh, except that looks like a bug right there. I was actually clicking the X and it was, I probably actually have something wrong in the ID. That's kind of interesting. Let's go back to this version of it. And I'm actually rather surprised. So for anybody who's maybe a little more interested in me test driving this, you can test drive these changes. There's a file in this project that I'll just pull up as an example under the page live. That basically was kind of when I was testing the add, which kind of allows me to take the form and render the submit on that form and just put something into it and then validate that we got 2 items in the list. So what I want to show in this case is that we actually can test drive this exact same thing. So I can go get the element for, let's say, the second one, item 2, and we're actually going to get the, I think it's called button.destroy. And then we can actually do something called render click, which really behind the scenes is just invoking the PHX click handler.
Oops.
Then
I think you need to switch screens.
Oh, I totally
there
failed. There we go. Wow. Sorry to everyone who was witnessing that. Okay. And I need to actually have this full screen. Thank you for calling that out, sir. So my bad. This is actually me misspelling destroy for the 30th time. But I can basically take the element, I can go find it in the DOM. You're pretty familiar if people have done any kind of browser driving test automation. This has a very similar feel where I can go find an element in the particular live view and then do something with it. So this render click that I was mentioning earlier just basically drives PHX click. Now, if I do this, you would expect after I click that, it would actually blow up because this is asserting that number 2 item hello is still in the DOM. So let's do a test on this to do. I'm just basically going to run a watch command here. And let me compile that apparently.
Well, while we're waiting for that to compile, we have a question out there.
Oh, good. What do you got?
So where does the ID come from in the HTML?
Perfect. So back here in the, I think the component itself. So right alongside the actual button, we had this handler that we wrote out, which was PHX click. So to add anything to that shows up as a variable for that, we actually just give it a PHX dash. And in this case, we had value ID. And I think if we go out to that binding documentation, I would really hope that they would have a good example of, and they obviously do not. That is a bummer. But so they're showing here in the documentation, the second parameter to the handle event is underscore value, which is really just a variable that's not used, but you can actually put anything in there. So this is a great example for us to basically look at. I think I can do like PHX, let's do demo val equals, and what other stuff do we have in here? We have the ID, there's also an order. So maybe I'll do like at order here. And this will actually be a really good example of how to actually debug stuff and see this real time. So I have my test, which is failing anyway down below. But now if I go back to my handler, we can actually see some of these by doing an IO inspect of whatever the thing is. So I'm going to do
back to the code editor too.
Oh man, I'm killing you guys on that. I'm so sorry. Okay.
So good.
So yes, I love showing that documentation, don't I?
Yeah.
So let me go back to the template that everybody did not see probably. So what I added here, just as like a way to say, hey, let's all check this out, because I actually don't know off the top of my head, this is deep down inside of the actual template language, which is this kind of sigil H that you see here at the top called HEEX. And deep down inside here, I think they basically just bind this to the click handler. If any of you have ever like written a raw JavaScript click handler where you can kind of like close over a variable and include it in the function that's called, this is kind of what they're doing, I'm sure, behind the scenes. But let's experiment. So I have this PHX something, and actually I'll just call it demo, because that seems interesting. And then here I'm actually going to go grab what I assume is going to be demo from this map, because that's really what happens. We shove these in as named keys. And so let's create one called demo. And as I run this test below, what I'm really doing is just kind of hoping that something showed up here. And this is actually a really good error for everybody to see before you fall into the game and go, what is happening? Because this looks like a very crazy, error message, but it is actually one that you're going to run into if you actually destructure in the function head that we've done up here. And that's because it is actually not destructuring. It is something called pattern matching, where it tries to match the function based on the arguments. And if it misses, it actually throws a big crazy error like this that tells you, hey, I cannot find a handle event for delete with these arguments. And so one thing that I do sometimes is I'll just like pull this map down and say that is too scary for me. I'm just going to make it value. And then here I can both log it, which is probably what we should do. So this will give me a chance to kind of inspect what this map looks like before it blows up. And so now if I run this, it looks like all I'm actually getting here is a map with the ID of 2. So this PHX must be PHX -value -something. So I know I'm actually showing the code this time. I went over and looked. So let's do a PHX value order, because that's actually what we're trying to show in this value, which is different than ID. So I'm going to assume that I can get order from this here. And I'm actually going to save the other file as well. Did you want to save that? Okay, cool. So I'm just using this test, which is now back to a little bit more sane failure. It's just a truthy falsy error. But now what I actually see is the value of that map is both ID and order. So I hope we actually answered this question, which is you can basically put PHX -value any variable name you want, and it will show up as part of the map.
I was curious where the at ID in the curlies and at order in the curlies, are those just like, are those injected?
Yeah, so these are things, actually, I think if I go back to the page, I can show you.
Magic?
Well, I think they're declarative up here. So I actually have ID going into the component. So imagine this is like a React prop, and you have ID. You have ID equals, to-do.id or something like that. This is kind of how it's coming into that other template. Is it's coming down as a property like that, and to-do as well. You can declare different values. So what else did I have that you were asking about? Order. Do I actually have order in here? It looks like order. So that's actually coming from me destructuring or pattern matching out the to-do. So it looks like when that other template pushes a to-do into it, we actually rip it apart and use those variables down here, I think. So yeah, we actually shove them onto the socket as order, completed, editing, text, so that they're a little bit more accessible up here, I think. But yeah, that's a good question, because this really is, these fundamental pieces are really how you're going to be productive at all inside the templating language. So I didn't want to spend too much time on the component piece, but those are good questions, and we will get to components in the game in just a bit. So we're going to start with just kind of maybe showing that this first render function is actually in what's called a live view page. And so if you look at the top, this is actually just a live view, and I can have components inside of it that are a live component. So just like React, where you maybe have everything as a component, that's what these live components look like. But live view also has a singular process that is actually running in the background, and that is basically where everything is communicated through. So that would be the page itself. And I don't have a great visual for that, but the page kind of delegates down to these individual components. Okay, so this was me just like hacking around, and I can, for anybody who's like, why is your test failing? Well, this actually should not be a cert, because that would say that we actually still have both after the delete is clicked. Instead, we want to refute, which means basically the opposite of a cert. So instead of saying, yes, we expect these two elements, we're expecting instead just the first element and not the second element. So I think we still have some other issue, but I don't want to digress us any further on this weird to-do app. In fact, I want to spend as much time as we can in the game. So let's jump back over to, and I'm following my monitor really closely now, Justin. I can see the terminal. So if people have not and already run this, you can do, you know, your deps.get and your mixed phx.server. And this will basically spin you up. Now, I usually just kind of have this running in the background because, especially if you're using it with Docker, you really don't need to look here much unless you're debugging a variable or something like that. And I'm actually going to tear this down. And I think my server's back up. So let's go back to the browser real quick and just see president. So if I reload this, hopefully the page is coming back. I think so. Okay, cool. So here's going to be the first thing that I would have you do, just to check this out for yourself, is basically get this going with another browser. And I'll basically just throw this into my Firefox browser over here. So I got Firefox and my other browser. That way I can start the game. And what I want us to have us do first is that this green button right now does nothing. So if I couldn't play a card, which I could, but if I couldn't play a card and I try to click this button, it's not allowing me to skip to the other player, which is our first task. So I'm going to guide us just a little bit in how do we open up that first file. And there's really one particular file that we're going to look at. And I'm going to open up just basically a new terminal to go take a look at this. So there is a game live. Whoa, that is not what we're doing. Game live. Yep. And I'm just going to give us kind of a rundown. I think it's at the very top of the game live is the render block. And this is, you know, a bunch of code, but I'm going to do my very best to kind of guide us and keep us in line. The reason I really wanted to kind of share a full working example app is I'm hoping somebody is remotely interested in this and would hope to see a little bit more challenging stuff. This whole code base is out here for you to play around with and do whatever you want with it. So the first guidance I'll give you on this is that we're going to go down to just beyond the star rating component that is in the UI for the player. And there is basically an if block down here that is really where we have that green button show up. And so the very first thing we'll do, and this is going to be exactly like what I was doing in the previous to-do app, is we're going to add to this button, we're going to add a PHX click of some sort. And that is going to allow us to skip. And skip can be handled for the most part by the game engine. And I kind of have some pro tips about how to use that, but you're going to write a handler and a PHX click that are going to be very similar to this binding documentation to say, okay, go ahead and skip the game. And I think if I go back to this here, I have a couple like helpful hints here about each exercise and how to actually execute. So this one says, you know, start by adding a PHX click to the green button, and then the handle event code needed to drive it. And here's my hint, is that you basically need to get the game session by name. And there's a bunch of code in this page that helps you figure out where the game name is used and how you might find the game session. And then finally, I kind of linked to a deep Elixir module, which is really the brains of the game, called game session. And you can just invoke a method called skip turn with the game. So ultimately, you'll get a little bit chance. We'll probably spend about 5 to 8 minutes here, give everybody a chance to play around in the code. And then I will ultimately just drop in and kind of show you a couple things that are important about the binding handler and then how to use that. Ultimately, though, all you're going to do is PHX click, go ahead and use the game engine and then return something back over the socket so that the client knows the game is moving on. So all kinds of good code to hack around inside here. And if people have questions or just hate the frustration of this game, let me know. And yes, we had somebody actually being helpful here. That's awesome. So click events. I'll bring this up because I very much wanted to see this. Here we go. So they are PHX value. Thank you, Francisco. This is good stuff.
And there was also a comment on your tests. For the other project you were just running where you ran a test there, that was not Cypress, right? That was just, was that what comes with Elixir, or what's your test suite there?
Yeah, it's called XUnit. It's just a server side, I think it's probably just the stock Elixir unit test framework. Because one of the interesting things, like I'll let everybody continue working, but one of the interesting things about this model is that you very much stay away from a lot of the client testing, because the server is actually the one that's doing all the change detection and diffing, and really all you're doing in your render click test code is just running Elixir functions, which is kind of where it's a little weird. If you've been doing a lot of Cypress or Jest or something in the browser, is you're actually just staying away from the browser and instead just driving server events. I'll try to watch these comments here because I was apparently oblivious to this earlier, but.
Hey, also, so I'm rolling with VS Code.
Yes, sir.
And I installed a plugin or an extension to get good or better syntax highlighting, but I don't know. I wouldn't say it's like awesome. And you're
That's
using
not good.
iTerm, so maybe you don't have any recommendations, but I didn't know if you.
I've used VS Code just to help my coworkers kind of get up with it about 2 years ago. And there was just a Elixir LS plugin that uses the Elixir language server. I don't know if you use the language server stuff with VS Code, but I remember it being half decent way back.
And also, how do you get another user in your game, in your running game?
Yeah, good call. So if you've already started the game like this, the best thing I would recommend is probably just go to /new, and that will basically kick you to the boot up page. And it's at this point that it's kind of crucial that you join a second person in before you hit start. So the game's only brain logic is that if you start the game before someone else is officially in, we can't deal them in after the fact.
Gotcha.
So you're kind of locked out once you start the game. But you should be able to just restart or
perfect
kick back to new. Yeah,
that worked. Thank you.
Cool. Yep. Yeah, and if people really just are like, yo, just give me the code, I got to bounce, that's totally cool. It's actually getting later than I thought. There is a branch called final. And if you just literally go to the final branch commits in order, I have every single step that I was going to execute for you anyway. So there's skip, there's stage, there's the icon, there's kind of more of a component icon, then a component block icon, and even drag and drop. So all the code is out here, and you can go to the final branch and play the full game locally if you want. And I did see some time back here, Justin actually said he got it running. Good news.
Yeah, it was actually, I just needed to put quotes around the command. I don't know why, but whatever.
Okay.
Just a simple Stack Overflow search.
There you go. All right, so I know people either maybe still be working on it, but I'm just kind of get us rolling. Feel free to keep doing your thing, but the simple version I'll show is I'm basically going to do a PHX click for what is it, stage? Sorry, not stage. That's next. Skip. And once I actually plug that in, I would actually need to do a handle event, and you can see a whole bunch of handle events down inside here. And I'm just going to be lazy for speed and copy paste this. So I basically copy pasted the handle event block, which gives me a value. And in this case, we don't really care what the value is because we actually just are saying skip. Whoever the active player is gets skipped. So now the magical code that comes out of this is really the game session code. Like, how do I actually find that? And there is a function called with session that is kind of my cheat code. And it basically has this game.session cache, which will basically say, hey, go find this game. So let's start with that. And I'll actually just say, hey, if, because if it doesn't, we'll probably blow up. I'll just do a fun boom. But if we actually find the particular game and we get the game name from this pattern match or destructure here by doing assigns, and then there's actually game underscore name. And so once I have the game name, I basically have everything I need to do to find it, and then also to tell the engine to go ahead and skip. So I'm going to show real quick where you can find the brains for the game. There's an engine itself, and that is kind of like just the straight functional code to do the work. But there is also this session, which is kind of the stateful version of that. So each time you start a game, you basically get this game session, which is like an in-memory process in Elixir Erlang that actually holds on to the state of the game. And all it does, you'll see if I go down to like some of these functions like skip turn, restart, play, it basically just delegates through to the engine. And so the engine actually is the brains. And in fact, if I look for, where's skip? Yeah, here we go. So if I look down here inside of, okay, what happens when I use the game session? It actually just calls through to skip turn. And that's all that's going to happen behind the scenes. Now, the reason that we use this is that mainly it enforces sequential ordering. So you don't have that issue where two people clicked at the same time and we don't know what to do. If two people clicked at the same time, this will guarantee that those are operated on first in, first out. So this is just one way to kind of keep the game functionally working that way. So I'm going to use the skip turn here, and I can do that by saying game session. And if you're like, where did he get this name? The cool part about Elixir is like, if you ever are like, I just want to use a function, you don't have to use your dependency injection system or anything like that. You literally just use the name of the module. So here, what I did is I just went to the top of the file and said game session. And I think I had that spelled right, but I did not. Game.session. And I can do skip turn. And then I think I just give it the game name. Now, this is actually going to return me basically a new structure, which is kind of the map or the object, which is the game state. And what we need to do with this now is actually return back over the WebSocket in LiveView this stateful information. So we do this just like we did in the other example with no reply. And normally you would do something like, assign the socket game state XYZ. I actually just have a helpful little handler called setState, mainly to help all those React folks feel at home. And I'm going to do setState with the socket, this new state that you see above, and then actually the socket.assigns, which is just kind of a set of the state that we already have. So if I do this, and I'm just going to save this and go back to my game here, I can actually click this here. And let's see if I can actually skip my turn. It did not actually work, which is always bad. Trying to see if I actually got an error. So I'm looking at the server logs and I'm basically just scrolling up. I don't see any kind of weird error. So now I'm actually thinking I should probably log something out to make sure my little click handler is wired up correctly. So I'm going to do an io.inspect. And this is one way you can actually log a variable. I show this in the README as well. But you could do something like game name and then pipe that to io inspect and say Toran game name. And really what I'm hoping for is that we would fall into this helper and then I would get some information. So I'm going to just save this, flip over to my Docker and just see if I can reload this, if it will actually show anything in my terminal over here. And, oh, it did not like that. So let me go to Firefox here. One thing you'll notice, like if you're disconnecting from an error and reconnecting, is it will bounce between your players, because as one player disconnects, the game actually tries to make sure there's always an active player. And so it will basically set up, and you can see this huge red text over here, which is actually good. I'm surprised that we got an error on such a simplistic thing here. So it doesn't like games skip turn. Maybe it's just skip. Whoops. I'm going to go back. I probably just used, looking back at def skip. No, it is actually, oh, I see. So it's both the game name is the first function argument and the player ID. So that's my bad. So let's plug in as a second argument, the user ID. Now, if you're looking in this file and you're just like, where is the current user ID? There should be a player that shows up on the assigns of the socket, and it has just a really simple integer value called user ID. So I'm basically going to pull off of the assigns both the game name and the player, which has a user ID. So we'll try and do that. Let's see if my parentheses matched up here. Okay, let's go back to Docker just to see if this is actually running. And that is not what I expected here. Oh, okay, cool. So it actually did drop in to give me the game name, but then I'm actually still getting an error with my second parameter is not set. So it must mean that my game name, which I think I actually had in here, was I'm just going to drop the user ID as well. And so basically, I'm just logging these to see what on earth I have possibly missed here. But something that's actually a little fishy is I feel like I'm not actually getting a rebuild on that code change. So I'm going to recompile this by just dropping down real quick. Okay, not sure what was up with that. Okay, so it took me back to that screen. I will attempt to, oh, cool. Okay, so it actually skipped that time. I think what I ran into there was I actually had changed that code, but for some reason, Docker had not actually done a notify and recompile. So that's actually a very annoying lesson, but you can see on the upside, the Docker log that I dumped out is both the name of the game, that was orange 3551, and then the player ID, which is just a random UUID value. So we are functionally skipping. And wow, if I could just not go to that window anymore. Okay. So let's go back, and we don't need any of this code now, but I am actually a little curious if I save that, if it's actually reloading. Yeah. So I feel like there's something definitely going on. So I'll show you in the Docker side here, maybe a different command that'll help us. And I think that's a different command. Instead of running mix phx.server, which is what we were running earlier, I'm going to run this IEXS. Oh gosh, what the heck is that command now? Mix phx.server. I feel like one of these should actually be live reloading every time I make a change. And if it doesn't, we're going to have all kinds of trouble, which is very strange. All right, so I'm going to go back, put these in specs back, and just see. I'm going to do a bunch of enters here just so I can like visually see that we are reloaded or not. Okay, so we are serving traffic here. Now, if I go back, I want to take these out and just kind of save it and see if it reloads here. All right, this might be just something up with my Docker config setup where it's not notifying, but I think I can run recompile. Okay, So that's probably the advantage here. And I definitely want to plug this in the chat, is for people who are like, what did he just run? Because yes, there we go. See, Francisco, this guy's on top of it. So IEXS mix PHX server. Now, the reason that you want to use that is because you can then run this command, recompile. Now, recompile usually is not something that you have to run from Phoenix. So if you're running this on bare metal hardware, you probably don't have to do this and all this hack that we're talking about. You'll just see a live reload. But if you are like, why is my code not changing? You can run recompile like I did over here. Now, if you have no changes, it'll just say no op like it did there. Okay. So we're probably an hour behind schedule. We'll get going here back to the code, but the shorthand version of this too, if people are like, Toran, this is a lot of weird boilerplate code. I actually wrote this with session function, which is kind of cool. And I think you just pass it a game name and then some kind of functional block here. And so I'll actually get rid of all of this, and you can probably see a better version of it like this. So in the join, or I think any of the other code, I basically just call with session, which just goes into that same block to go find the game. And then within that, we actually return the state game state. And what this does behind the scenes is the def with session that you saw down here. It basically extracts the state from whatever function we called. For that example, it was skip, and then it basically pipes it back out. And then also, this is one cool part about Phoenix that we don't have time to go through today, but if you're like, how does this communicate to the other connected browsers? One of the upsides of everybody having a persistent connection is I can actually communicate a new virtual DOM diff and patch every client connected. So in the game, I can update not only me, the player who clicked the button, but I can also update the browser of the other players, which is pretty cool. And that all comes out of the box with Phoenix, and is probably just a better tutorial on its own, because we're kind of running out of time. But let's take a look at the second example, which I had as the stage. So if you look for PHX click equals stage, I know I have it up here. Here we go. Stage is something that actually is just a click handler on the card, or the actual card itself. And I showed that earlier when Justin and I were kind of playing, where you can touch the card and it will kind of like lift it a little bit. And I think I can show this in the browser if I start the game. Go back to my other browser here. And so if I lift this king, oh, this one is not connected here. And now I'm not the active player. So if I lift this jack, oh my gosh. Remember when I said this would reconnect? This is making me look really stupid today. Okay, one of these is the active player, right? Oh, never mind. I realize why it's not doing this visually. It's because we haven't written the code, obviously. The reason I wanted to show that with Justin earlier is just so everybody had some visual of what we're talking about. If you go back to the README of the repo, it kind of shows this really quick, which is that when you touch the card by clicking it, that in itself is the PHX click handler that we're going to run some Elixir code. And there's kind of a little blurb down here about some of the Elixir logic that we're going to use. And you don't have to implement all of this. I think we'll probably just give a few minutes to give everybody a chance to touch on how do I touch the cards. And the kind of spoiler that I want to go down to is, let me see, we don't have a handle event for that. So imagine that you have, real quick, a handle event for this stage, and you're going to get some kind of value from this. And let's go actually take a look at stage, because I think I called it flip ID. Yeah, so you would actually have a flip ID, I think it is. Oops, flip ID. And there's other stuff you can get off it. Obviously, we need the game name to do much of anything. And I think we also have the player ID. Yep, at the end of that, we have the player ID from the last pattern match. Now, for what we can do inside of here is just sort of ask some questions, and I'll give everybody a few minutes to play around with this. One of the things I want to show that we'll probably pull off of the assigns is there's actually a player hands, I think it's called. Let's see, player hands. Yeah. So you're going to want to pull off in the pattern match this thing as well. And you can do it up top, or you can do it right here by destructuring the assigns off the socket. And you'll want to do that because what you're going to do is you're actually going to roll through and find this player by user ID. Wow, I need to actually be in my other keyboard. User ID to, because there's obviously a bunch of hands, like each player will have their own hands. And some ways to kind of poke around at this, again, are just io.inspect. And you can do a label of like hands and do player hands here. That will let you at click through time sort of inspect the player hands, which is kind of cool. There is also, what else do we have that's useful on here? Oh, let's see. I think there is, so yeah, we actually have the player ID, and you can find out sort of all the assigns information if you go look at the mount here. And a lot of this stuff is kind of the necessary stuff like the game name and the actual session. But if you go down and look at def set state, this is kind of the big brains where you can see the bulk of what happens inside set state is we rip apart various pieces of the game engine, and then we also get the players as well, but then we actually assign those back out. So this down here on line 354, this is basically everything that is currently on that socket that you can pull from. And so probably maybe the active player ID, I think that was one of them I mentioned in the README. Let's go out there and take a look here. Oh, there's actually a helpful function you can look to see, is the player active? And there's also a way to see, is the actual card staged, because there is kind of those two steps where you can stage it by touching it and then play it if it's already staged. So I'll give everybody a few minutes to kind of like poke at this and see what comes up, and any questions or harassment, I'm here to hear about it for sure. So. Ah, yes, the presence line. Okay. 323. I think that's right up here. Yeah, so there was kind of a mention, Francisco had this questions about presence.list. And one of the interesting things about Phoenix is just how much stuff it gives you for distributed and multiplayer type experiences. So this presence allows you to actually know who all the users are without writing any code to track them. And so what I use this presence.list for is a way to say, hey, anyone connected to the WebSocket with this channel name or topic name users for this game, I want to know who those users are. And I think I just used that to roll through them at some point, but I was trying to figure out where that was actually useful. Yeah, it looks like on 342, I'm actually using those to go through and do something with this to actually get each individual player. So I think probably what this presence list is, if you look up Phoenix presence, that is a kind of useful out of the box thing that comes with Phoenix. Oops, yeah, Phoenix presence. And so it just says the ability to basically track people, I think. So where they have a good example here. I mainly use it even when I wasn't using LiveView. I just basically used it to know who is looking at a particular WebSocket channel or topic so that I can communicate to all of them or find out who all of them are, which ends up being pretty handy for, especially for games like this one. So I think everybody's probably ready to move on here. And if you're not, remember all the example code is up there. So check that out. Actually, I could probably leave this destructure out here that I broke up. So remember, I sort of alluded to earlier that if you're new, and honestly, for a long time in Elixir, when I was early playing around with it, I did not like this pattern matching so much because for me I didn't like it in the function head because it just made reading the error messages really tricky, or I was not very accustomed to it. So the approach that I would use instead is to actually break it off like this. That way, if I was like, honestly, let's be real, I was debugging and I could actually be like, hey, what is on the socket.assigns? And that's just a really quick way to pull this stuff apart. So I will add player hands here. Oops. So this is, and if I break this down so it's a little more human readable, you'll see the parts that actually matter for what we're going to do. Okay, cool. So I can pull apart from the socket all the stuff that we actually care about here. Oh, Francisco has raised hand. Let's see what's up.
I have a question here. You mentioned that you hate pattern matching having in the signature, and I remember in the past, you know, that the signature is getting longer and longer if you are trying to match the whatever you want to grab. And so I instead put it in a separate inside of the do block. Like you. Yeah. I think that the purpose of the pattern matching right now that I understand a little bit more is that when I want to use that function, so I can use the signature to match and select the function that I want. And
absolutely, yeah.
In this case, it's more like a handy way to fetch variables. But
yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, here's kind of what you're talking about, right? Is I can actually use this as conditional. So this function handles the 1, 2, 3. This one handles the 4, 5, 6, and that's actually like a benefit to the language to have that. Is that what you were saying, or?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I should rephrase. Like, I definitely enjoy pattern matching. I think I was maybe feeling a little like, you know, if this seems strange or like you're not familiar with the syntax or these crazy function error messages, it's okay to start simple here. But as Francisco pointed out, there's actually a big benefit in the language of Elixir to use those different, they're almost like a method overload, but even more powerful as you get deeper into Elixir. So either one is totally cool. I'm just going to shorthand it for now, just so you can also visually see it. Otherwise, I could format it all the way out. But this way you kind of see as well, I think for the new programmer, that this stuff is actually living on socket itself. And it is just a map. And they say map in Elixir, but you can think of it, if you're coming from JavaScript, it's basically like an object key value pairs. And you can see key value pairs, the biggest gripe that I have with Elixir is that they actually allow strings like you see here. So I have a string with a arrow. But they also allow this thing called an atom, or like a symbol. And that's honestly my biggest pain point, is Elixir allows both of them, and they work differently. So if you have a map with atoms and not strings, you have to be aware of that. And what I should say is up here in the LiveView event handlers, these are always string-based maps. So be aware of that. So I'll jump ahead here to kind of the final version is, because this skip button should really only be visible, it kind of is a silly is active check here, but one of the things I mentioned in the README was, hey, we probably should double check to make sure that the person clicking it is the active player. And I just have kind of a convenience function in here to do that. If you are not active, so I'll do the else block, then really a quick way to say, what does the WebSocket do? Well, it doesn't return anything new, because if you're not the active player, I don't know how you even got this message all the way over to the server. So we're just going to return to you the same socket. Now, in the case where it is active, this is really where the magic happens. And that is, we're just going to go find using the enum.find. And this is kind of like almost like the JavaScript find, where you can basically say, okay, enum.find, I want to give it my list, which is player hands. And then I'm going to write a function to go look through those. And those are key values. And this is kind of in the weeds of the actual structure, but we're going to look to basically say, hey, is the key the user ID? And if it is, so we have our case statement, which is, you can think of it as kind of like a more powerful conditional, but we can actually just use it really simply here to say, hey, if we got nothing back, so we did not find this, then just don't do anything. Otherwise, this is the one that actually matters. If we got a match on the player, which would make sense, then we want the player's hand to come back. So that's all we're actually doing, is saying cards coming back for that player. Now, the second step here is really, okay, I have all of that player's hand, but I don't know the exact card, but I do have the ID up there in the flip ID signature. So I can say clicked card using enum.find again, and actually go through those cards we just got, getting the card, and then just match on the card.id is the flip ID. So this is actually going to tell me what is the flipped card. And then with our friend from earlier, the whole with session, just to kind of shorthand this, I can provide this the game name and the socket, and then pulling apart the game name as an argument here. Oops. There was really one more conditional I had in here, which was like, again, I can touch the card once, and then if I touch the card again, it actually plays. So we're going to basically just do a real quick check on, is the card staged? And if it is actually staged, we will say game.session.play, giving it the game name and the user ID. And that basically, we don't have to even give it the card because it's already staged, and we just tell the engine, play it. Whatever you have, if it's one of a kind, two of a kind, or four, play whatever you've got. Now, in the else case, this is where we're basically going to stage it for the first time. There's also a stage method. This one just takes one more piece of information, the actual flip ID and the user ID. So that's kind of the gist. This was a little bit more about reinforcing the click handler, which is already wired for you, but also giving you a chance to kind of run through and use the enum module a little bit. Admittedly, this is kind of requires some in-depth knowledge of the game, and is a bit challenging in 5 minutes to be like, oh yeah, Toran, I know exactly the structure of the player hands, and I can operate on it. So apologies for that, but I wanted everybody to get a sense of some of the Elixir code that we were playing around with as well. Let's see if we can recompile that and not get an error, hopefully. Okay, and then the last proof of all this working is to actually try and play the king, and we did. So that was the stage function and pretty basic stuff. Let's take a look at something that is going to be a little bit more into the icon piece. So there's this little like head up here, and when you click it, you actually want to be able to show all the available icons and do something with that. We're kind of beyond our time frame. I think we normally stop at 8 o'clock. Is that true, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, we can go a little bit longer. I mean, it is typically, but you know, I mean, people can drop off, and this is always recorded, so keep that in mind.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. So I think what we'll start with then, if everybody's cool with it, is I'll just try and basically roll through this. And again, all the source code, if you are short on time or just don't want to hear me, ramble through it, is all on the actual branch called final. So if you're just like, hey, I'm really interested in the JavaScript interop with drag and drop, how does that work? You can check this out in a single commit. The one we're going to look at right now is the icon. And really what I wanted to show in this particular case was how you extract and use the LiveView components. And so I think what I'll do is actually just go up here to, there's like a Z index that you kind of have to, or you can hack to make this a little easier. And I'm just going to basically make the Z index of this heads up display the same as the top level so that I can always get to the head. So if I go back here, this is the active player. And so if I go back to the game and I were to click this, now I don't think it's actually going to bring anything up here. It'll bring up that like overlay that you see here visually, but that's because what's actually happening is I do have the event handler for that. It's called settings. And so there is a button down here when you are not the active player that will give you PHX click for something called settings. And if we look for handle event on settings real quick, all it does right now is actually modify a piece of state inside the LiveView process, which is handy. I mean, it actually is giving us the door to go do some HTML, but there's really no HTML modal right now. And so the settings modal done, if we go up to the render block, I actually have kind of a block of code down here towards the very bottom, like around like 114, which is, okay, these are where all the splash modals, whatever you want to call them, like the kind of the overlays show up. And I have other examples we could go into in the future about the winner, the details, and the one we're going to look at real quick is the use modal component here for the settings. And now I can put really anything that I want in here. So if I do like a P tag, and I just put hello world, and I really wish that would re-render. That is a super big problem. So I'm going to put hello world in there. And then if I go back and I guess I have to reload this here. And if I click this, you'll see in the upper left, it's a very tiny hello world. So of course, if you want to find your favorite modal code, you could definitely create your own CSS or HTML modal. I'm just going to admittedly cheat because in my components directory, I kind of have the one that we already used for the weighting modal. And the part that's cool about this is I thought I would just basically show us creating a component from scratch here. So I'm actually going to create a new file. I'm just going to call it modal.ex. And it'll just, you could put it really anywhere. I'm just putting it in the components folder, mainly for organizational purposes. And then I'm actually going to rename it to modal. And this one does not need a star rating or any of that nonsense. And in fact, I don't need a good bunch of this code actually. Oh, I did need that. I had this best 3 to 8 players in here where I actually looped over all these players, but I think truthfully, I don't need any of, yeah, that's my render block there, right? Just trying to figure out where my delete actually was. All right, well, I'll delete all of this for now. And at the bottom here, I'm just going to show that like really the only method that you would implement for a very basic component in Phoenix LiveView is just the mount method. And it's really just saying, okay, I am mounted and I have a socket, but this HTML really isn't anything to write home about. So I'm just going to save that and we'll see if we can recompile this. And I promise you, it's not normally this painful. I am still really unhappy about this live reload failing me here. Okay, let's see if I can bring this up here. Oh my gosh. If I had actually changed this to modal. So let's go back to the page. And I had hello world in here. That was me laughing at myself. If I actually want to use that new component that I drove out, I would just do live component. And then it would be the full name of it, which I'll import or alias up above. And then for right now, I actually don't really need any other code. This one takes a few parameters and we could put a few of those parameters in there, but to be honest, I don't really care too much about those. I'm just going to go to the top of this file and bring in our modal. And then I'm going to recompile again, just to have it pull in all that code and hopefully not blow up. Okay. And okay, so I have my little modal starting to take shape here, although I still have hello world. And whoops, where's my hello world? I thought, oh, I never actually deleted it. Handy. Okay, so I actually deleted that. And then if I go back to the modal itself, I had this logo PNG, which I actually don't think I really need. So I'm just going to delete that. And then I'm going to show you how to kind of do a little bit of composition, because this is just basic HTML copying around. But if I actually want to alias in very similar modal, I'll pull it in with another alias. I think it's called settings. Yeah, there we go. So I'm actually going to bring in this component that is already built, just to kind of show you how you would use these together. And so it's over here, and it kind of has the logic to show all of the individual icons that you see there. And just like I did for this modal, down here, I'm just going to copy this syntax down inside my block here. And instead of modal, this will be settings. And we can actually look to see what settings takes for parameters, because this one I think actually does take maybe just a socket maybe. Okay. I was just kind of looking at the mount and the update here. And I do see that we actually pass it an ID. And I'm trying to figure out, it looks like we actually don't do a whole lot with the ID, but we might want to pass that through. So let's just do an ID of, we probably do like user ID here. Now, if I want to provide user ID, oops, I think I need a comma there. If I want to provide the user ID here, obviously I've got to go up a level to the page and, whoops, the game live, and actually provide this. So I'm going to do a user ID. And I think I actually have a way to get like, yeah, the active player maybe. Yeah, the current player struct. Okay. So I think I can actually just reuse this function as we create this to pass it down. And this should be the actual current player itself. So maybe not, that'll just be actually user. And then if we go down here, this will be probably a chance where we could destructure the, let's do a update method here. User, and this is probably an actual game.player, which would hopefully allow me to pull out of it the user ID, I think it is. And then really all I'm going to do is just tack on to this a assigns with the socket, and could say user ID is user ID. Okay, so that should provide us the ability to actually use it up here, as Mike was asking earlier with the @ symbol. So if I use @ something, it has to be present. And so I'm actually making it a thing right here inside update, which is really just a function that is kind of running when those props that we passed in at the page level flow down and instantiate the component. So let's see, I've got this plugged in. I think I've got the other file saved. And now I just need to hope that it all actually works out. So anybody else feel like it would be a miracle if this compiled? Okay. So line 42, I'm looking basically right here on modal 42, says we don't have assigns. So let's check that out. Assign.
Do we need to put assigns in the mount?
You can do that here. Usually that's kind of reserved for default values. And I'm not sure, for example, like I don't actually have the props to rip this apart inside the mount, because all I actually have is the socket. You're saying like pull it apart from socket assigns like this?
No, I remember that mount, a mount has, you can assign some kind of initial values.
Definitely, yep.
After that, you can use the update, but we don't have a user ID. So
yep, so that was one of the reasons I kind of left this alone, is I really don't have an initial value per se, but I did have up here something called user. And I was kind of trying to pattern match out when this page passes it down to the update. It allows me to pattern match out what I think is the game player struct. And then that has inside of it the user ID. Yep. The problem was actually I had this, I'll show you the difference real quick for anybody who missed it. I was using the word assigns there, which is not a function. And this word assign is the correct function there. So that was why I got that first compile error. And let's see, now I'm actually don't have a socket on 42. Why not? Oh, okay. So the second argument here is the socket, which helps to have a compiler. Okay, so we're getting a little further. Let's see if actually, I even forgot what we were trying to do. We were passing down as an ID to the settings, the user ID. So let's see if we actually got all the way through. I'd be really surprised if that actually happened. Can I click that? Okay, cool. So yeah, we actually did get that working now. And so I think the last step really is what I want, how I want this to function is that when the modal comes up, if I click any of these little floating heads, that it basically sends an event back to the page and then changes my little head from this to whatever I picked. So let's go take a look at what already exists just to kind of get an understanding. So is there a PHX click inside here? There is. So there's this update icon, as it's called. And the reason that I actually wanted to show this crazy example as deep in the weeds as we are is that one of the things I think Phoenix LiveView did really well is that it chooses to bubble up the click events all the way up to the page or the parent process instead of having the event be handled down inside of the component itself. And some of you come from different programming backgrounds and communities. This was championed back in my days of Ember.js as data down, actions up. So the reason that this is kind of a good pattern is these actions go all the way up to the parent to change the data, and then that new data structure flows down to re-render just the child components. And so if you remember, this settings component is actually down inside of another component, the actual modal itself. So we're not going to even bubble to this. We're going to bubble all the way back up to this, and that is, I think it's, let's see what handle events we actually have. Stage, skip, close, settings. We may actually have to actually write this out, but for simplicity here today, I think we'll basically go grab our method here because we are extremely short on time, but we actually did have an update icon. Yeah, there it is. Okay, so we had our update icon, but I didn't actually fill that in for you. So I'll just basically drop this in and kind of briefly cover. I already had a function that we could use to update the player cache, which is kind of an in-memory thing that we're using to track the players and their icons. And then we would actually push to the socket two things. We would actually say, go ahead and close the setting modal by just nilling that out. And then finally, we'd also set the player to that new icon. And whoops, when I have an end there. And then the other topic we covered a little bit earlier about how do I send the other web sockets the information that's updated. We can also use the Phoenix pub sub here as well to broadcast updates to the player, which is kind of cool. And then finally, we need to actually do what looks like I failed to copy that over, no reply with our new socket. And so this is me copying that socket over, and we will recompile here. And assuming that doesn't blow up, okay. Let's go back to our game and reload this real quick. So the upside here would be I click this head and I'm going to become this other person's head. And when I click it, it both closes the modal and changes my image. And I can do this any number of times, which is pretty cool. We're obviously over on time. I know Justin's being very gracious, letting me hang out and hack on this stuff. I hope everybody got a chance to see both LiveView, the very basics of the click handler, and also a little bit into components. One of the reasons I kind of waited to do this demo until this year is components were pretty new back when I did the first Elixir workshop, and they're becoming more refined and more robust today. They're still very much in flux, so if you jump in, it's still not 1.0. There will still probably be some breaking changes, but I've actually found the direction that the Phoenix team is going is pretty cool and pretty exciting. So I will probably open this up just for a few minutes to see if anybody has any questions and see what the chat's going on here. I see, oh, Mr. Steve's here. He had to hop off, it looks like.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. But What's up, Justin? What do you think, man?
I am digging this a lot. I've got two quick thoughts. One, I can easily see a lot of the syntax in there mimicking some things from Ruby, so that, you know, you can easily feel at home in that regard. And then a lot of patterns, very similar to Vue or React or you know, or those modern day frameworks, which I also feel very comfortable in. It looks like Elixir would be a lot of fun to start producing inside of it. It looks awesome. I really dig that last thing you just did with the pub sub broadcast. That looks,
oh, cool. Okay.
That looks like a lot of fun. And the other thing I was going to comment on, so the game that you built, I know from my childhood as Asian War. I grew up in a very neighborhood that had a lot of Vietnamese and Laotian families, and we played it all the time, and it was very similar to this. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, I think this game has so many names. It's a popular bicycle game, so I appreciate everybody hanging out. And I would definitely encourage you, if some of my stuff was pretty off the wall, you know, this commit history or log was kind of a good chance to look at this stuff. And really, I appreciate you guys letting me get on and ramble a bit, because this is going to be a piece of this will be used for a full paid workshop actually at ElixirConf 2021. So I'm going to be doing a more full, like a 6-hour workshop, if you can believe that. I don't even know if this actual link, but yeah, I'm going to be doing a LiveView fundamentals course, and a lot of the inspiration for this course was put into what you're seeing here, which is I want to speak to components and component composition, life cycles of both the page and the component. I want to go into the hooks, which is like a JavaScript interop layer. I want to go into a little bit more testing and architecture, but we actually build 3 different things. We build that little to-do example. We also build this game. We build it out more in depth. And then also through the entire thing, the class builds a complete functional e-commerce product. So you get a chance to see Stripe and Google Maps and all that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I loved all the examples, everything you used here, and Roland, in your IDE with iTerm, I thought it was very useful being able to see your file paths front and center.
Right. Okay.
Very, very, very
I didn't
useful
even think
from
about
my
that
perspective. Yeah.
You know, when I was showing my terminal, right?
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the engagement as well. We had a few people help out, Mike, Francisco, and obviously you were helping out as well. And I see Mr. Steve. Unfortunately, he couldn't get on and harass me, but he's a friend of mine from Nebraska. So really
I am on harass you.
Oh, you are, Steve. Oh my
Yes.
gosh, man. I was just about to say some really awesome things about you, of course.
No, I was hanging out on the Twitch channel, and I'm like, who are these people asking questions? Where are they asking questions? What's going on? But I finally figured it out. I do have one question for you. So what is the offline story? What does that look like for Elixir?
Yeah, LiveView, you really can't build offline apps, period. Yeah, because what's happening behind the scenes is, like, the second you disconnect, there really is not the equivalent functionality. So once you lose that socket connection, you're just basically dead in the water.
Yeah, I mean, because I really like the idea of patch updates that are as small as possible going to the client, because I still have, I think you know this, I've got a lot of family that's in Zimbabwe, in Africa, and there, you really have to sip on data, right? Because data is extremely expensive. So anything that minimizes the content that the user has to download is key. I mean, here we have an abundance, right, of data available to us, and it's almost unlimited. But in a lot of countries, in Southern Africa especially, you still have, excuse me, a lot of people that don't have access to that much data. And this looks like a perfect way to be able to streamline the amount of data that you're sending back. But the offline story becomes an issue, though.
I know, it's like they did really good on the one side, but then really let you down on the other. Yeah, there's actually some great talks from Jose Valim. He's the founder of Elixir and works a lot with LiveView and that team. And yeah, they actually goes so far as to say, like, it's more efficient than returning JSON payloads. If you actually look at the wire, like the WebSocket traffic that comes back, it's like, it almost looks like the most minimal AST that you could ever see. It's like the number one with like the very minimal HTML or the very minimal string diff, which is just very different than the way that I do like GraphQL to React over Apollo. Yeah, so you definitely can see the efficiency gains of that. But yeah, it's kind of sad that when you go offline, you're kind of stuck. I think really for a team that wanted to spend some money or some time, you could build with PHX hook some really good interop story that would be pretty cool. In fact, the Stripe and the Google Maps stuff, and in fact, the drag and drop that I have in this example app, those all show that you can write a little bit of JavaScript and still get some interesting interactions, but to be completely disconnected from the Phoenix server is the trouble spot. So
yeah, because I was also looking at Stimulus from the Rails side of things. Right?
Oh yeah,
they have a similar approach that they want to do. And then also Laravel also has a similar approach. And I'm looking at all these different approaches because I constantly field questions about what is the best way to send the smallest possible diff to the client side.
Yeah. Yep, that's cool, man. I think React will probably have a store. I mean, they already have server components, but I think they're going to be just going further and further into this. Even in my estimation, I think they should really try to compete with all the great productivity that you saw for server development, but also try and compete with the virtual machine that Erlang and Elixir have underneath, because I think Facebook has enough money that they could actually do something really awesome with React, which is already very popular. So,
okay. Yep.
Cool. Man, Steve, well, we're going to catch up soon enough anyway, so I'll leave those questions for another time, but thanks for the feedback. And I see one other question about, is the workshop virtual? And yes, it will be. The workshop on Elixir, that 6-hour workshop, is going to be 100% just me in my room, just like this, hacking and hopefully more refined than I am today. But thanks for humoring me and going along for the ride, everybody. I appreciate that. And for Justin and Mike and everybody who did the work to host it, Eventbrite it, and get the word out. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. All right. Yeah, we'll hit everybody up on Twitter. Follow all around. Thanks again. Thanks all for coming out. And yeah, this video will live on Twitch for maybe about 2 more weeks, and then it'll drop off. So watch it while you can.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Bye, guys.